Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. We're back for the Green Agenda. First of all, happy Black History Month and happy Black Climate Week. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 2 of the Green Agenda. First and foremost, as we always do, I want to say thank you to our sponsors, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Climate Action Campaign. Before we get right into it, I want to first take time to acknowledge the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson was a pioneer in both the civil rights and environmental justice movement, as he famously attended the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, where the historic 17 Principles of Environmental Justice were crafted. It is fitting for tonight's episode, the Fight for the People's Bill, the Environmental Justice for All Act, first introduced by our now ancestors, Congressman A. Donald McEachin and Raul Grijalva on February 27, 2020, and then introduced again in 2021 and 2023. We have the best guest tonight for this topic, Mar, a former staffer of Congressman Raul Grijalva and current Legislative Policy Director for the Climate Justice Alliance. So let's get this conversation started. Before we get into it, I want to take an opportunity to let you introduce yourself to our audience. What should they know about you as we get into this conversation?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure. On historic times, on Black History Month, and yeah, absolutely. Mar, I go by Mar. That's my nickname, Zepeda. And I am originally from Mexico. When I migrated to Arizona, I lived in late Representative Raul Grijalva's district, and so I worked with his office for almost 10 years, was part of the process of developing the community engagement part of the Environmental Justice for All Act. I have a personal connection to the environmental justice issues that a lot of communities face. So this is definitely a personal passion and work and mission for me. And currently I'm working at Climate Justice Alliance as their legislative director.
Thank you for that introduction. And then I always like to ask, just as a little side quest follow-up, what kind of brought you into this work and into this movement? Like, what was your journey here?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of personal and a little bit of I like to call it divine synchronicity. In Mexico, I faced my family and a lot of my community members faced a lot of water contamination due to agricultural practices. Mostly the companies that were doing these actions were U.S.-owned companies, and we faced a lot of threats. And so anyway, it is deeply connected to that, my upbringing, working with local indigenous communities there that were fighting for clean water, and until this day are fighting for that. So when we moved to Arizona, I had the pleasure of working with late Representative Raul Grijalva, and it was a full circle moment for me. I didn't know that I had, the opportunity to bring in this experience that I grew up in, and that actually living in a super fun site in Tucson, Arizona, would also bring me to the policymaking world and bring this angle and this experience into working for environmental justice policy. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so incredibly important to talk about those origin stories and what brings us to the work, right? And especially particularly in building connections between what is personal and what becomes of the work, right? What manifests in the work because of these personal connections and the way that it supports us to inform how we show up, right? That you are not separate as Mar from your childhood and Mar who shows up now in these policy spaces, but that it is because of those experiences that you had that have informed the way that you show up and how you are able to advocate for communities, right? Holistically as a person, right? So many of these issues like get separated from like who we are at home, who we are to our families, who we are to our communities. And so thank you for giving us just a little bit about your background.
I would like to add just one more note. It
please.
Also made like this part of divine synchronicity was because of who late Representative Raul Grijalva was. He just had the gift of this huge, beautiful intuition, and he just knew and saw right through you. So thanks to him, I also am part of being here, because he believed in what I was basically capable of. So before I did. So,
yes, I appreciate that. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about like what your introduction to this work under Raul was like, what it was like to study under him, what it was like to serve alongside him? Like, what was it as you were coming into this work and serving, particularly in the time in your journey where you were serving with him? What was it about his work or his legacy that kind of drew you in?
Well, it was a lot of things. He led his work with a lot of humility, with a lot of humor. Like, he was not separated from where his origin stories, was, to him being a silly, normal person. Yeah. And I really liked that, right? But the thing is that he was such a great mentor, because he believed that, like, if we read an article or if I shared a story from a constituent that was, like, very concerning, he's like, well, do something about it. And he, like, just made sure that, like, we were supported to do something about it, and we did, regardless if the community found out or not. We tried. Yeah. So he was always very empowering, and there was a lot of that, like, process, right, of, like, believing and empowerment. And I had the opportunity to lead a lot of work, specifically on, like, foreign affairs. That's kind of where I started in bringing the angle of environmental justice, and just recognizing that a lot of, like, Afro-descendants in Latin America, for example, are, like, out of the picture when it comes to environmental work. And so I made a memo, and I would just present new ideas to him, and he was always very supportive. So one thing leads to the other, and then suddenly I am presented with the opportunity to work with under his capacity at the Natural Resources Committee when he was ranking member chairman, and his team there, including Chris Espinosa, who also played a huge role.
That's amazing. And I think I really appreciate, especially talking about and bringing attention to the folks whose shoulders we stand on, right? And having an understanding. It's not often that we have the opportunity, not everyone, I should say, gets the opportunity to serve under such strong leaders, right? And to have such strong examples, and to serve personally with them, right? Like, as we're in the month of Black History, right, and we think of all of these great historical figures, when we think of Martin Luther King, when we think of Malcolm X, when we think about Ella Baker, when we think about Harriet Tubman, when we think about, like, all of these greats that come up in these conversations as we consider our history, so often two things happen. One, our legends that we're living with are left out of those stories. So when we're talking about Black history, the first thought, or when we're talking about, honestly, our cultural heritage in general, regardless of the demographic, the first thought goes back to the founders, right? Like, the folks who served years and years ago. And so often the people who are serving right now and making history currently are left out of those conversations. That's one. But then two, on the other hand, on the other side of that same coin, it's that when we discuss these legends, living or deceased, it's so often about their accomplishments and not who they were as a person, right? And so to be able to hear about how he showed up in a room, his humor, right? Like how he was real, right? Like how, and to have had that example and to serve alongside that example, I know in my experience, those folks for me have supported and empowered me to step more fully into who I am and what my role is in this work, because they served authentically. And to see and understand our heroes, right, or the folks who are making history now, to be able to stand beside them and see them stand in their truth and see them beyond just like the platform makes a world of difference. And so thank you for sharing that little piece of him with us. And so now getting a little bit more into some of the meat and potatoes of what we're here to discuss today. First, let's contextualize, right? If someone has never heard about the People's Bill, can you tell us a little bit more about why it's called this, why it's called that, and then how community members helped to write it?
Yeah. So the Environmental Justice for All Act, the reason why it's called the People's Bill, it was adopted by environmental justice communities as a People's Bill, rightfully so, because they not only shared their lived experiences and concerns with late Representative Grijalva and late Representative McEachin of what like major environmental issues are, across the nation. They actually took part in drafting and being part of the policymaking process. So it was shaped by them, and this just gives us a clear understanding that the people closest to the issues and the problems are also the brains behind the solutions. And so it's a clear representation of that.
Yeah, and those kinds of frameworks are unfortunately so rare, right? That so often it's the folks who have the most money, the most power, the most influence that serve in dominant cultures or benefit from dominant cultures who are most closely situated to solutions or decision-making spaces, right? And so I'm curious, how do you feel like those frameworks can be expanded upon, right, and support to like build foundations for like ongoing work in policy spaces?
Yeah. Before I answer that question,
please,
I also wanted to mention that before it got to being the Environmental Justice for All Act, Representative Grijalva specifically was very adamant about doing something around environmental justice and the connection of civil rights. And he acknowledged very publicly that he messed up in a lot of ways because he attempted since 2015 to work on an EJ civil rights bill that he wrote and that his staff wrote and that he put out the solutions for, right? And so, I'm just gonna say, our people yelled at him and gave him the reality check of, no, sir.
Sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah, that's not how it works. You're not gonna speak for us when we're the ones facing the issues, right? So, just a little bit of more context. It got to the point where the people not only, participated and made the bill, but they also taught him a lesson, and that humbled him a lot. And his work with the community was unified since then. But to answer your question, what the bill would strengthen and what the bill would do, what we when we were working on the bill, we like to call it the three pillars of or the Holy Trinity, the three pillars of the bill, which included reforming and improving NEPA, so the National Environmental Policy Act, and that would just make sure that the protections around public comment, engagement, and community input were in place for any projects, right? Then there is the considerations of cumulative impacts. And as you know, there's compounding effects when one project comes in zone A, but there's 10 others in that same area. They the way that process works is like they only consider the health impacts of that one project that is upcoming, not the one surrounding the area. So that was a huge one. And then there's the civil rights component, so like fixing the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, specifically called the Sandoval fix, and that would basically provide a legal redress for frontline EJ communities and other low-income communities that may be facing discrimination. And that was mostly because we know, not explicitly, but we know that a lot of projects come into place because they know that like they don't have a voting power or they don't have economic power or a lot of say in their political status of that. So there's a little bit of discrimination that could be used when fighting projects there. And so it is mostly an empowerment, and it is mostly a bill that would protect and empower communities to not just stop bad projects, because that's not what it is. It's mostly to be able to say no.
Yes.
When you're like, how much is too much? You know, and be able to look for, here are the tools that I have as a community, as an engaged person, and actually I have the right to say no.
Yeah. That makes a world of difference. There's so much floating through my head. The first thing, I want to go back because you said something important, which is that the representative came to the realization that he had made a mistake, right? And I think so often we live in a culture of several things. We live in a cancel culture. We also live in a culture where the responsibility to rescind a statement often is like placed on PR, right? Or like this is just a blip. It was just a minor oversight, right? Like where this idea is that like if there is a mistake that is made, that like sometimes there's a glazing over of it, right? And so one, I want to go back to the fact that he acknowledged that he had made an oversight, right? That like whether it was out of ignorance or just sometimes we move with like just an urgency. It's like, I'm trying to move as quickly as possible, and getting community insight is going to take time that I feel like I don't have, time that I feel like we can't afford.
Right.
And unfortunately, what's lost in that process is the very core of what's necessary to drive the work forward, right? And so the fact that he was willing in that moment where he came to that realization, even if it was after he got fussed out a little bit, okay? Because sometimes it takes the community calling you out, okay? Sometimes
he was so comfortable.
Sometimes it takes the community saying, look, you missed the mark here. You're confused, but it's okay. I'll educate you, okay? Sometimes it takes that, but for him to have had the humility to take that step back and to reconsider is a testament to his character that you've already spoken to, but it is also something that so many of us could learn from.
Yeah.
Because the fact of the matter is, in this work, you will not always get it right. There will be times, especially when you are advocating or working to uplift and create platforms on behalf of other communities, there will be times where you forget that it is not your voice that is the community, right? That like the community has a voice, and maybe you're in a position of power or of influence where you have certain resources and tools not afforded to a community, or maybe you are spearheading in some way, shape, or form, but it's easy to lose track of that. I am maybe a representative, you know, I am a voice, but I am not the voice, and I cannot speak on. So I want to go back because that's so important for us to hold space for that action, right? That next right step, the next best step in that moment for him to say, all right, wait. Let's pull back. Like, let's revisit this. Yes. Like, let's actually work to slow down, because sometimes you just have to slow down, right? Sometimes you just have to slow down to drive the work forward in the right way. So I want to hold space for that. But I also saw you taking notes. So I want to pause really quickly because I saw your wheels turning.
Yes. So on the aspect of really just slowing down, I feel like a lot of people, we are all victims of a system that has us multitasking and doing 20 things at once. And especially the culture here in DC, working in Congress, like, you don't have time for anything. You are literally, you're focused on what's next, what is the problem, what's the solution, and let's get to it. There's no time to make time for the community, unfortunately. And the contrast is, when you look at the way that Congress was made and the Constitution, it's the people's house. U.S. House of Representatives, the people's house. Where are the people in that process?
That's good.
Right? So there was a big question mark, and Mr. Grijalva was very much like, he fell in the trap of, he was a representative. He was only doing what he was supposed to be doing. But then the opportunity to learn from people that he was accountable for came, and that's a beautiful thing. I think the other thing is that I recently saw on social media something along the lines of, anyone doing community work will always mess up on that community, and it just speaks to the sensitivity.
That's a hard pill to swallow. Absolutely.
And you have no idea how many times we got yelled at by community members, and I'm here for it. You know, I don't live what they're living, and I'm not at the reality that they are. And yeah, like, if you're not from a certain community, you don't know what it's like, and you can't. That community work is not gonna, match whatever that community looks like. Yes, you may have your own perspective, your own struggle. You're unified by that struggle, but you're not part of that community. You will mess up, and it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to learn and just understand that.
And that's so good, because even when we think about, sometimes we can be blinded by, well, I have had some experience, right? Like, or, I used to live in this community, or I've lived in a community like this community. Like, I have experiences adjacent to, right? And it's such a trap to generalize your individual experiences on those that you serve with. Again, like, a reminder again and again and again and again and again, not even just for the folks who sit in office, right? But it's a reminder across advocacy organizations, right? Because the work of an advocacy organization should be ideally translation, right? The work should be of a representative translation, right? This idea that I have come to understand the needs as a result of thorough research, as a result of thorough relationship, as a result of thorough, connections, and I am translating now, based on all of that information that I've gathered over time, onto this platform, using the influence and power associated there, right? But sometimes, like you said, you get so caught up in all of the things, and there's so much work to be done, and there's a pace, and there are deadlines, and we have to meet them, and we have to get to them. It's easy to lose the community. And so I really appreciate him having taken that time. And then I also want to bring up, you mentioned how he uplifted the importance of creating and of building a platform on not just the EJ movement, but also on civil rights, and how those things were deeply connected. And I think that's so important, because sometimes there is a siloing of these areas of injustice in society, right? That like environmental justice is over here and racial justice is over here and social justice is over here. And these are like the compartments that we fit them in. Or even like when we look at political agendas, like, well, here's my agenda on this issue and here's my agenda. And not often enough are we talking about how all of these issues are interconnected, how these things are not like separate, like mutually exclusive topics that do not impact each other, but they are so deeply interwoven that you cannot, it is a disservice to discuss one without the other. Because how can you discuss the environmental justice movement without talking about the disparate impact of environmental injustices on differing marginalized communities, right? Like, how can you talk about pollution without talking about the disproportionate amount of pollution in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods, right? Like, how can we have these conversations? You can't. They're not mutually exclusive. They are intertwined. And so it's so important for us as we talk about Black history and as we talk about Black Climate Week, talking about also how all of these issues are, especially in a time like this, where there's such a push for separatism and there's such a push for polarization and there's such a push from the administration to like focus over here, like I'm gonna cause a lot of chaos in this area, so you look away from what's happening on the other side of the curtain, like look, I'm pulling strings over here, right? It's so important for us not to be lost in these conversations, to not be lost by just how robust and the volume of issues that we forget how closely connected all of it is. And so I really appreciated that, and I wanted to uplift that. You've already spent a little bit time talking about the National Environmental Protection Act, what it is, but can you talk about how the EJ for All Act strengthened it, and then what power would that give to community?
Yes, so I wrote a little bit of notes because there has been a lot of changes to NEPA, and I was like, wait, which version of NEPA I'm going to be talking about? So, I mean, the way I like to think of NEPA is as somebody who grew up with a strong Mexican character mother. I like to think of the law of like, do you have your keys? Do you have what you need before you walk out the door? Because you will be harmed by it if you don't take your jacket, or if you don't, have what you need. It's like carrying the thing that you need to do and like reflect on before you act on something. And
shout out to your mom.
Yes, to all of our moms caring for us before we even know it. So it's like, hey, before you build that highway, that pipeline, now the data center, did you check what's going to do to people, to the air, to the land, to indigenous communities, So it's like this, again, before you act something. So NEPA currently requires environmental impact analysis, and that depends on either environmental assessments or impact statements, requires public comment and community input, and considerations for other alternatives. And the way that EJ for All would modify NEPA is it would codify into law the requirement for early engagement and equity-based, right? So if you, like, I don't need a PDF posted on a senior center where no one's going to see it and no one is going to find out about it, and it's only in English, but I'm a Spanish speaker, and if I'm supposed to be finding out about a project, how am I going to do that, right? It's intentional, right? So, like, be intentional about the way that you communicate early, and have translators, interpreters, things like that.
Yeah.
So accessible language and translation, and the requirement of outreach of impacted communities. Again, look at the people that will be impacted of that area, engage with them, let them know. There's a huge piece to transparency here, and just honesty with the people, right? Like, we've been just thrown in the dark and lied to this whole time. We're asking for transparency. So it's not just them being informed, but like making communities being part of the process. And then it would close a lot of loopholes that we can review. So a lot of things with NEPA, they have been chipped away with exclusions or like fast tracking, weekend definitions. So the EJ for All would limit categorical exclusions in overburdened communities. It would require stronger analysis of environmental and health harms, and it would prevent agencies from skirting review. Like, we want the review no matter what. We need to know what's going to happen, what are the harms, what are the consequences or not. We want to know. And by knowing and like by having this information, the federal government would reduce their litigation activity by so much. A lot of also the litigation is expensed by ratepayers, so it's coming out of our taxpayer money.
Because they weren't proactive. Because
they were not proactive, right? And so we're trying to prevent. Engage us in the process. Let us know what's coming. We're saving you money.
And then I won't have to sue you.
And exactly. So yeah, it prevents just clear processes, ensures communities are addressed and upfront, and reduces back-end project delays. That's a little bit of what the EJ for All would do on NEPA.
Yes, and that's so... It's important that it is written what should be common sense, what could be considered common sense, right? Like, these practices that communities have been engaging in some time that aren't codified in law, that this must be a process, right? So instead of it being something that we'll do it if we have time, right? We'll do it when it's convenient. We'll do it when or even like talking about notification. Like, I know something that we experienced, or that has happened quite a few times in Genesee County, is that notifications are sent, but it's like sent in a manner that I'm never going to read this. Like, it was mailed out in like a stack of information, and it was in language that it's hard to understand, or the opportunities for public comment were during the workday when 90% of the workforce is not going to be able to make it to come and actually be able to participate in the political process, right? So creating more opportunity, as much as we can advocate and continue to push for adjustments in what's currently in policy to accommodate what should be, what you would hope could be, common sense and common practice.
I want to add that a lot of times when the government asks for some sort of engagement, there's a lot of mistrust from the community. There's almost fear, right? And then let's think about what's going on right now. Like, if the federal government asks to come to a community or something, no one is going to show up. Because there's no reliability, there's no trust. There has been historic harm. A lot of undocumented communities, for example, what is the benefit of them showing up and learning about a project that is not only not in their language, but will actually in these moments risk their safety and their lives.
Exactly. You know? And there is no having this conversation without having that conversation.
Exactly.
Like, I want to pause and hold space for everything that is going on and has happened in these last few months, but has been happening historically even much longer than that, but has been happening just in such blatantly harmful ways in these last several quarters, right? we cannot have conversations about community engagement and participation without discussing the fact that our federal government has enacted policies and made asks of our federal force in such ways that has created fear-stricken communities that are afraid to show up in basic ways. Like, there are so many communities in this season that, like, I'm afraid to go to work. I'm afraid to go to the grocery store. I have a close colleague who works in the school system in Minnesota, and her school district was sent to go virtual for several weeks as a result of all of the ICE activity that had been happening in their community. And for several weeks, she was supporting families to get groceries during that time. So it's like, if I don't feel safe to go to school, to send my child to school, if I don't feel safe to go to the grocery store, what makes you think that I would feel safe to go to a government building to advocate on behalf of my community, even for something that we need, even for something that I know may be potentially harmful to myself and my children, when I can't do what is necessary to meet my basic needs, right? Like, these are things, again, these are conversations that we cannot have as if they are mutually exclusive occurrences, right? Like, these are not mutually exclusive situations or circumstances that we are living in. These are targeted attacks being made on specific communities in a very intentional effort to cause fear, like to cause fear, to make it more difficult for folks to show up in the ways that are necessary for our democracy to function as it was intended.
Yeah, and so I agree with you 1,000%. And the reason why I mentioned that point before is because the government has an opportunity to correct that. By actually doing what they need to do and creating that process that it is transparent to all the communities and that it is expected. So there's nothing scary about it. So it is an opportunity for the federal government, hopefully for a future one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's good. So back to the matter at hand. I get all riled up. I got excited. So even though there were strides under President Biden's executive order 14096, revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all, it was then rescinded by the new administration in January of this year, so just last month. What are the strategies on the local and state level that can still work toward EJ for all? And what are some current success stories happening in communities around the country?
Yeah. So the power of policy making is that because the federal process takes a while, is that this bill has served as a model for a lot of different replicable local and state bills. And I'm not trying to just speak like, oh my god, EJ for All has been the bill. No. And vice versa. There has been examples of local regional bills that have inspired EJ for All, like the New Jersey Cumulative Impacts Law. And they have their own EJ bill. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. I think there's a lot of states that I can think of, New Jersey, Oregon, for example, that have their own EJ law or frameworks. New Jersey, in 2020, they passed a law that basically denies and or conditions permits in overburdened communities, and have like very specific definitions of what overburdened communities and disadvantaged communities are like, from the economic aspect to like the cumulative impacts. And that was, I know it was a lot of hard work. Oregon has their own EJ framework, and that one requires cumulative impact analysis and climate planning. So each state, I think, has the opportunity to get creative and really just understand what does the community and what does the reality look like here? So we know how to enforce an EJ framework, right? There's like also state level NEPAs. So there's the New York SECRA, and that basically incorporates a lot of EJ values into the process, that similar to NEPA. California has their own CEQA reform, and it has great EJ screening tools. And look, I'm not trying to say these bills are perfect, because they're not, but this is a great way and a step in the right direction. Another component is the civil rights enforcement at the state level. At the federal level, there has been just ton of changes to the civil rights, just
anything regarding civil rights.
Yeah. So states, please defend your civil rights. So there could be a lot of like Title VI protections along their own state agencies. So for example, they could require equity impact reviews, and they could allow for communities to file discrimination complaints. There's a lot of community benefit and consent frameworks, other legal redress tools, and like maybe zoning that blocks harmful siting. Like there's a lot of local, very hyper local needs there that they could look into, because a lot of, again, like the impact is based on the decisions and like of where those communities are. So zoning is one of those too. And just making sure that funding is required for community participation, engagement, and relationship building sometimes. Again, creating that trust, translation access, expanded comment periods, and other ways to provide comment, or even like educational opportunities to like, how do you provide a comment, hearings of impact within impacted communities, things like that. Those are some of the ones.
That's good. And it's really good to hear, especially like the local level changes that are happening, because and we've talked about this previously on the show, right, that it's important that we are cognizant and very aware of the power that exists beyond the federal government, especially in conditions where the federal government is not the most appeasing to requests regarding equity, diversity. Like these are hot button words right now that can't even be mentioned when in these conversations, right? So in circumstances where, like now that we are living in, where the federal government is actively not only not open to, but creating obstacles for community engagement in the way that they had been framed under other administrations. But it's important that we are thoughtful of the point I'm trying to get to, what we can do at the state and local level, right? And have a clear understanding of what is available to us beyond the purview of the federal government, right? Yes. So what you can do in your community that will have real implications in your community, in your city, in your county, in your state, that is beyond the scope of what the federal government can do, right? Or what they can implement or execute, right? There are things, let us be very clear.
Yes.
Let us be very clear. There are things that are beyond the scope of what the president can do, all right? And so I'm happy that to talk about the many successes that are happening in community right now, where at the state level, at the local level, people are stepping into the power that they do have and using the models and the frameworks that have been created and established. Because one thing no president, no individual can do is erase the progress that has been made, right? We may take a step back, There may be a season where the work looks a little different, where we are having to adjust. Maybe we call it something different. Maybe not. It's now not DEI. Maybe it's something different for these next few years. But at the end of the day, we cannot lose, especially the intellectual property that has been created and the progress that has been made in those ways, in the language, in the frameworks, in the tools, in the resources. We still have those things.
I have 2 things to add. One is more tools that the community can use, and the other one is actually like a quick story about, and this ties a little bit into what you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. But going back really quickly, another way for accountability at the state level is with attorney generals to be using their investigative and oversight power. You can engage directly with your attorney generals and request, or if you suspect that there has been a violation of a certain federal law within your state, or that oversteps or triggers state preemption, go with your state attorney general office and they will probably help think of this. If you have a good attorney general, I'm sure they're on top of it. If you don't, then act with diligence.
And even if you have a good one, it's not a bad idea just to give a little extra push.
Yes.
A little extra, just making sure this is on your mind. Absolutely. You may be thinking about it, but I just want you to I don't want to let you know I'm thinking about it too.
We are observing.
Mm-hmm.
And then same with local and county prosecutors. So the litigators on the more local level, they have very much authority for oversight, investigation, and just holding other people accountable. So use them. Mm-hmm. And then to tie it back to what you just mentioned about we may not call it DEI, but the work continues. This reminded me of a story I went to in New Orleans. I went to an archive place, and I learned that there was a letter from the NAACP from the civil rights era. I don't want to cry with this. That basically said, we can't use the word Black advocacy because we are being targeted. And there's a huge record of paperwork from original faxes from the I think that's what they were called back then, from the NAACP, proving that the work, no matter what, continues regardless of what we call our work. And I just want to tie it back to where we're at and the importance of this week and this month. Yeah. That is
look, I am an empathetic crier, so don't cry. But no, again, this goes back to at the beginning of the conversation, we talked shortly about acknowledging and recognizing the shoulders that you stand on. Mm-hmm. And in previous episodes, we've also talked about how important it is to know the shoulders that you stand on and to consult your elders in these matters. Yes. Because it's actually sometimes been making me giggle, because sometimes you just have to laugh to keep from crying. Yes. But sometimes hearing our elders speak about the Trump administration, look, they're like, child, we dealt with this 30 years ago. Yes. This is nothing new. Mm-hmm. And it's so helpful and grounding because sometimes it can feel like we are living in unprecedented times. And in some ways, we are living in unprecedented times, okay? But there are also other ways that, in the same way that this administration is using some of the same tools of a divisiveness, some of the same tools that have been used in previous generations, there exists tools, resources, frameworks, foundational concepts, foundational principles, foundational values, and belief systems in progressive cultures, right? And there are so many models for how to press forward despite, right? And they've done it for generations and generations and generations. I mean, this is Black History Month. We can talk about generations back, even preceding American democracy, where African American people and the ancestors of African American people, the ancestor of Black people, have fought, right? Like, to gain ground. Like, we are here because the fight, because they fought and they fought and they fought and they fought. And sometimes it seemed like they lost ground. Yeah. And sometimes it seemed like, you know, every time we get to the next finish line, it's moved back, right? The ancestors of marginalized communities have fought for ground for generations, right? And so it is so helpful for us to be reminded and grounded in the fact that you may call it a different name. You can change the name. You can change the playing field. You can rescind some orders. You can try to change the law. You can act beyond what the scope of your power is. You can do all of those things, and we will fight, and we will show up, and we will bring our communities with us, and we will speak truth to power, and we will speak it again, 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 and we will do so until it's not necessary. So just until, because right now we're just at until, right? I don't have an endpoint. Right now it's just until. But it's so important, right, that we are reminded, right? Because it's so easy to feel hopeless. So thank you for uplifting that. Because yes, like if we do not know our history, it is so easy to think as if I am the only one. I am the first one. This is the only generation where we have experienced that. And unfortunately, that is just not the truth. But also, fortunately, that is not the truth.
We have to hold ourselves accountable, too. And history helps us do that. So, yeah.
That's so good. Okay. We're getting short on time, and this always happens because I get so excited. I'm just having such a good time with you, Maud. I want to prepare to frame us for the close of this conversation. And before we wrap up, we always like to take an opportunity for you to give a call to action, right? Like, if they haven't heard anything else, and I always say, I hope you've heard everything else, because there's so much in this conversation that I hope that they didn't miss, right? But if they didn't hear anything else, if there's one call to action, one thing that you want to embolden or empower communities to stand on in such a time as this, Black History Month, Black Climate Week, what would you say?
Yeah. It's so hard to just choose one, right?
You could give us two.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would suggest here, and strongly suggest, is, connect with your family members, loved ones, learn about history, maybe start a reading club or storytelling circle, play some bingo, I don't know. But share history and not just share the struggle, but the successes.
That's good.
Of where you're at. Share stories that enlighten you, but also just allow you to understand that we're all humans and that we've been through and we continue to be on this path together. I also want us to recognize that we're not separate from environmental justice is not separate from human rights. That we all deserve the human right to clean air, clean water, and a clean environment. And so our Mother Earth is so commodified, and we need her for everything, and we unfortunately exploit her so much. And I just want us to reflect that how we treat our Mother Earth is how our future is going to look like. And And then another call to action is, if you know about Environmental Justice for All Act, there is this opportunity for re-engaging and actually being part of the input process again, because there has been a lot of changes to NEPA, like I've mentioned before, and other reforms made negatively impacting the permitting process at the federal level. There's just so much happening with permitting in general because of data centers for AI and just expanding energy, competing against China.
So much.
Yeah. So there is going to be an opportunity to re-engage the people that were participating in that process from years ago, to resubmit and reimagine what the EJ for All bill needs to look like according to the political reality that we're under. So I am doing a lot of that currently with a lot of colleagues. You can more than happy get in touch with me, but the offices that are now going to lead this bill and that are also going to soon open the public input process are Representatives Adelita Grijalva, who is the daughter of late Representative Raul Grijalva, Summer Lee, and Rashida Tlaib. These 3 powerhouse women are going to lead this bill in the next iteration, and we need help. So I think the next thing is, like, come together and we can think of what that new version is gonna look like. And again, it is a people's bill, so it is our process, and we just work with the congressional offices and make the improvements that are needed. I think that's what I have.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode of The Green Agenda. Again, I say happy Black History Month, happy Black Climate Week, and we are so excited to see you again right back here this time next month. Bye.
Ciao.